Lewiston City Council order, special meeting, budget session 3 at the time and place is advertised. Our next order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance, so if you'd please stand and join us in reciting our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our next order of business is citizen comments. This is an opportunity for citizens wishing to comment on agenda items or other matters they wish to bring to the council's attention, excluding those scheduled for a public hearing. As there may not be another opportunity to comment once an agenda item is addressed, individuals are encouraged to speak at this time. Individuals are encouraged to discuss operational issues in advance with the mayor in consideration of others wishing to speak. Commentary is limited to 3 minutes, and also council policy, we promote and practice civility within this body. So I don't see any citizen comments here today. We had one person who stopped by my office today, councilors, and requested accommodation. She needs somebody to sign for her, you know, and
signing.
so she is not here yet. So I'm just gonna kind of slow this thing down for a minute to see if she shows up. I don't know if she's familiar with this building or not, but we'll just see if that happens. If she does, she didn't give us enough notice to get those services, and so Director of Province is going to work with her through a laptop there where we can maybe translate or transcribe some things. So, excuse me, I don't want to have to go back to this once Amy opens up, so we'll just wait another minute. She did know the location, she knew the time and everything, so.
Yeah, maybe if you want to.
You want to introduce Justin while we're waiting?
Sure, Justin, would you like to provide some citizen comments for us?
Go to the podium right there. Where's the microphone?
He's waiting here.
What exactly am I presenting?
Yourself.
Just myself?
Yep.
These are the microphones right above you, so we just ask you to introduce yourself for the record, and then the floor is yours.
Yeah, hi, my name is Justin Glenn. New citizen to the area. I'm the new Parks and Recreation Director. Yep, coming from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Been here on the job. This is my first week last week, plus 1 day. So really happy to be here. Looking forward to it. Family's really enjoying the area so far, and been able to tour some facilities. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for my department to help the community and improve services across the board. So,
Welcome.
thank you so much.
We're not going to set the bar too high, but we are expecting some amazing things.
No pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure at all.
Oh, man.
That's what I signed up for.
No, I feel confident that we will do some very good things. We're going to meet Justin again tonight at the regular council meeting. We have some other surprises in store for you, and Justin may or may not be the headline. We'll see. He's got some stiff competition.
Definitely not, sir. Definitely not.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, council, we'll move on to Roman number 4, budget items. Please note that identifying an item as an action item does not require the city council to vote on that item. Item A is funding the budget revenues. This is an action item, and we have our finance director with us here today, Director Gordon. Director, please introduce yourself for the record and any staff members you may have with you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. Amy Gordon, City Treasurer, Finance Director. In the audience, I have Claire Blewett, my accounting supervisor, with me today. She also does a lot of work on the budget. Glad to have her with me today. I'm going to try to walk through this slowly today, primarily because I don't want to miss something I had intended to share with council. So at any point today, if you have questions, please feel free to interrupt me, stop me. I want to make certain we take care of those questions as you have them. So today we're here to talk about funding the budget. And we're primarily gonna be talking about the funds that are highlighted in the dark blue today, and we're gonna be skipping over those that are grayed out. The primary reason is, these are our internal service funds, such as the workers' compensation fund, fleet, the information systems and security fund. We've already had some discussions during the work session, number one on those funds. They are here to support other funds. They have a funding mechanism. With fleet and information systems, they did increase their operating rates. Both of those funds increased at 6%. Those were primarily to absorb the cost of the payroll. So just like any other city department, they are on the same pay plans that we have. They receive the same benefits any other employee receives. So those costs can drive their budgets up, and when they do, we need to be able to pass that on to the other departments. Information systems, they have a little bit of extra in their budget, but it's very minimal, and it's on facilities, putting a little extra in there for facility securities. So this last year, maybe even over the past 2 years, they've taken on access into city building and facilities, so they handle all that security when we go in and out of buildings, the locking mechanisms. They've absorbed that, so they had a very minor increase related to that. I'm talking like $2,000-3,000, so we absorbed that in there with their personnel costs. But other than that, that's all that they've put into those operating rate increases was their personnel cost. Economic development, we really don't have much activity in that fund. That is primarily to manage the CDBG grant funds. So those are monies we receive from the federal government and program out. We also have our ARPA project running through there, but again, that's money we've received and now we're spending it out. So there's no other funding going into that fund. Police retirement and perpetual care fund, those are our long-term investment fiduciary funds. They generate their revenue they need for their expenses through their investment plans, so we are not contributing any funds into those funds. So we're really here to talk about the funds that are supported by property tax dollars today.
Director Gordon, can I just ask you, on the perpetual care, could you just share with the council how we do put money into that fund?
Perpetual care it's called the Perpetual Care Cemetery Fund. So every time we sell a piece of inventory at the cemetery, whether that's a plot, a niche, there is a portion of that fee, and I forget the percentage, but it's established by state law.
10%.
10%. A portion of that, 10% of that sell of plot. So if you sell a plot for $1,500, $150 of that is a perpetual care fee. That $150 goes into the perpetual care fund, which is a professionally managed investment fund. And though that original deposit in that fund will always remain in the fund, but any interest and earnings that have been earned off that $150 can at some time in the future be transferred into your cemetery fund to help ensure that the cemetery is maintained in perpetuity. We do every year include in the cemetery budget a transfer off the perpetual care fund. It's a minimal amount, it's $50,000. That's fluctuated over the years. It was $40,000 for the longest time. It's been higher in years that there's been a large capital project planned. But the standard at this time is $50,000. It's what we program into the cemetery fund from the perpetual care fund. My office always maintains the history of that fund to make certain that we're only spending the interest and earnings off of the account and that we're not touching the principal contributions. So Capital Projects Fund, we have 3 activities within the city that have funds established in the Capital Projects Fund. That is our parks program, our transportation program, and our library program. Library, we're not going to discuss it today. It is pretty much, there was some information in the packets provided to council last week or last work session. Library is just residual funds that are left over from when they constructed the new downtown library. There's not very much in there, I think approximately 40,000. They get any additional contribution revenues that they get each year go into that fund. Again, that's a very minimal amount. It is sitting there waiting until that money can be married up with some money from the foundation and go towards a bigger project. So that money's just sitting there right now. There's no plans to spend it this next coming year, but it is appropriated out just in case the foundation came through with a contribution that they can match with those funds to execute a larger project. The parks, they receive $100,000 of property taxes each year. And when it comes to the capital projects fund, I allocate out the property taxes that were there the year before. I don't ever change the property tax amounts that are going into the capital projects fund. That usually either comes at the mayor's direction towards me in preparing the proposed budget or through council action. So those amounts stay as is unless there's a directive from the mayor or the council to modify those amounts. I want to talk a little bit about capital parks today because we didn't cover this in the capital projects budget work session, primarily because we don't have a long list of projects scheduled out of these funds. But, and also we're kind of we're in between directors too. So Shannon and I just built a budget that would provide some opportunity, and we'll walk through what that is. There are three kind of sub-activities within that parks activity, three different accounts that we maintain in Parks Capital. The first one is the reservation account. And so what that is anytime we reserve a shelter, so someone goes and they reserve a shelter, they pay a fee to reserve that shelter within our park system. They pay a fee for that. That fee goes into this account. We keep these fees separate from the other funds and use those fees to fund a project that will then generate additional revenue for the parks. So that is usually the shelters, right? That's what we have available in our park system that we rent out to the public. We collect those fees, we put it in the park reservation account, we let those build up, we turn around and invest it into a new shelter. We have had the Pioneer Park shelter in the budget for a few years. It got postponed a little bit with the project that happened up at Pioneer Park this last year with the new playground equipment and the ADA parking stalls. And so this project has now gone through the design portion, correct? And it's ready to construct. That will happen in fiscal year 26. And we've appropriated the $20,000 of park reservation fees. That is typically what they collect in a year off reservations in the park system. And then we're utilizing $70,000 of reserves. And the park reservation account has this pretty substantial amount of reserves in excess. I think it's about $280,000. So there's sufficient reserves for the project, and that shelter will then be available for another rental site in our park system. Community park, we have a community park reserve account that was established many years ago. We've had prior councils that allocated property taxes specifically for community park, and when that was occurring, the property taxes went into this account, and they were used for projects that have happened to date up there at the park, and then any residual funds are now in its own reserve established for the community park. What we did is we just appropriated out about a quarter of what's in that account, about 25% of what's in that account, and we appropriated it just to give some opportunity if there was a smaller project that they could use those funds to get that project completed. The Parks Capital Project, that's where that $100,000 of property tax dollars goes every year. And this is the kind of the parent account for parks, right? Where you would fund new playground equipment or any other amenities or improvements that need to be done in the park system. The only identified project we have planned potentially right now from that account is a shade shelter up at Sunset Park near the pickleball courts. That's the account that we paid for the city's portion of the pickleball court conversion came from this account. So they have it slated to put some type of shade shelter or gazebo type structure up near the pickleball courts. And that's what those funds would be potentially used for in this upcoming year. Yes.
So these funds, they don't include anything to do with the golf course?
No, this is a separate activity, so we would never fund anything at the golf course from these funds. Capital transportation, I broke this out a bit for council as a follow-up to the conversation we had during the work session on capital projects. The 2.7 million of property taxes are being allocated to capital transportation. This is how those funds are being appropriated this year. This is what they're going towards funding. So street preservation has traditionally always received the $231,000 of property taxes. We pay the city, like our residents and commercial property owners, we have to pay stormwater fees too. These particular stormwater fees are related to the right-of-way and street. 50,000 of that property tax amount has also is historically been dedicated towards sidewalk and ADA improvements. For a few years, it was up to 100,000. Last year, that was one of the areas that got cut in the third reading of the budget, is that was reduced to 50. That in this particular year is planned to go towards a sidewalk master plan. And then the remaining 2.2 million is going towards the reconstruction capital projects that Dustin outlined during the last work session. I have those noted below what those are. So of the 2.2 million of property tax dollars, we would also be leveraging 3.1 million of reserves within that fund to complete the 9.2 million of projects, but we're also receiving about 3.9 million of grant dollars. Yes.
What's preservation projects? Is that like chip seal?
That's chip seal. Mm-hmm. Yep. Enough definition of that? Okay. Yes.
So are you going to, for instance, like the Main Street design in phase one, that 2.5 million, how much of that is proposed to be property taxes and how much of it reserves?
Well, I guess that depends on how you slice the pie. What I do is I build the projects in one by one. And so if you've got your grant funds, and then what the remainder is, depending on which project I'm building into the budget first, I'm allocating out property tax dollars first and then reserves. So I don't really have that broken out on a project by project basis. I mean, it could be like I could say, well, we're using only reserves on Brighton overlay and putting all the property tax dollars towards Main Street. But I could also say we're putting all the reserves towards Main Street and only using property tax dollars on Brighton. It's just the way.
So you just put it all together?
Yeah. It's just, it basically depends on which project I add to the budget first. I start allocating out property tax dollars first, and then I go to reserves. So now that we've talked about the capital fund, we're going to focus on the 4 governmental funds excluding the general fund. So we're going to talk about the 4 funds that are not the general fund. We'll save general fund till last. So when I build out the budgets for these 4 individual funds, what we do in finance is we completely reconstruct the payroll budget each year. It is just such a large portion of our budget, and we want to make certain that we capture all the cost of living adjustments, all the step increases, but that we're also capturing all the turnover that might be occurring through vacancies and retirement, so that we can offset those increases as much as possible through that turnover of staff. So we completely reconstruct it. We build out the payroll budget and any of the other items that we've previously discussed, such as internal service fees or any contractual agreements that we have. And then we load that into the budget. And then I look and see, is it balanced or not balanced? It's never balanced, right? You usually have to find some more revenue, or can't really recall a time when you needed less revenue. But so then I go on these particular funds. What I'll do first is I'll say, okay, what if I can use only reserves, what they have in reserves to balance this out and not provide any additional property tax dollars, what impact does that have on these funds' reserves? If their reserves are still sufficient, then we just leave property tax dollars as is. Otherwise, I have a conversation with the mayor and we discuss increasing the property tax dollars. I want to first focus on cemetery. You can see in this slide that we are planning on utilizing $277,000 of reserves in cemetery. That's very high. That's not typically what we would use. I think in the last year budget, we used about 80,000 of reserves. In the current year budget, we had 80,000 programmed. The reason it's 277,000 is we have a project in the 26 budget that is $230,000, and that's a columbarium project. I believe we've discussed that before with council. What that would allow is the construction of 2 columbarium at the cemetery. It includes the groundwork as well. What is important to note about this is cemetery hasn't been using their capital budget year after year, so it's been building up their reserves. So building up the reserves, and it gives them the ability to cash fund this project, which is what's occurring here. The other benefit here is once those columbarium sites are in, you'll now have inventory that you can turn around. You can sell the niches from the columbarium, which will generate revenue that goes back into the cemetery to replenish those reserves. So it's a high number. It's kind of alarming looking at it, utilizing that much reserves for a smaller fund, but it's a planned use of reserves. And as you can see, they're still going to have well in excess of 20%.
So with the cemetery, we've had a lot of discussions with the cemetery commission about their master plan, and one of the things is we didn't follow any of their master plans. So they were supposed to be coming forward with some projects for us to take into consideration. Is the only one that we're considering is the Columbine?
The only one that's in the 26 budget is a columbarium. I would imagine that's probably a good year-long project because it has to be designed, and then you've got to get it done within that construction season of the 26 fiscal year.
That's a big project.
Yeah. So library, we've been leaning on their reserves for many, many years, and we are at the point where we cannot continue to utilize their reserves to balance out their budget. So we've increased our property tax dollars to help ease off the reserves and help retain those reserves. We've allocated an additional $60,000 to the library, but as you can see, their reserves are still going to drop below 20%. So it's possible that in addition to the additional $60,000 this year, we would have to consider additional property taxes going to library next year. Library always does a phenomenal job at managing their budget, and so I think that we're safe to take this approach with just the $60,000 this year and then evaluating it again next year. Transportation fund, that's been our fund we've struggled with. They would need to utilize $334,000 of reserves if we were not to allocate any additional property tax dollars towards them. I'll just point out that is about the road and bridge reserve or the road and bridge tax that they used to receive. We're still trying to kind of fill that hole. And so I have a program to provide them another $150,000 of property tax dollars. That will help ease the replenishment of that reserves. And I think that's a safe way to proceed. Maybe in a couple years, that road and bridge tax will come back into the city and we can reconsider property tax dollars are being allocated. But yes.
Director, maybe just as a reminder for the council so we don't take it for granted, and also we have at least one new director in the audience. Could you just very briefly explain to them again about where these road and bridge tax dollars used to come from and what's changed in the last couple of years anyway?
Yes, you might do a better job at explaining it, so I'll try my best. The road and bridge is a levy that's levied by the county. And the last, I think this is a third year, maybe the second year in entirety, they chose not to levy anything for the road and bridge. So when they make that decision, then we don't receive any funds from the road and bridge levy. When they levy for road and bridge, the cities within their jurisdiction also receive funds from that levy. And without them levying, the city has lost about $330,000 of annual revenues that we've had to make up in other areas. You can tell kind of from the progression here that if we weren't providing the additional $150,000, that our reserves would actually drop by 6%, so they'd be down to 21%. Well, then what would happen next year is we would be down to 15%. So this kind of helps stop the bleed, but it won't stop it completely.
And so, councilors, there are other parts of our budget that are quite honestly under attack by the Idaho legislature. And so you'll see this in another part of Director Gordon's presentation where we continue to, if it's not cut, it's reduced funding that we used to get from the state and or we share with the county. And so when we talk about whether or not we should increase the tax budget, which we have not done for 3 years, it becomes harder to do that every year when we start to lose these funding sources and the additional flexibility that we used to have. The only other place we can turn is to property taxes. So then the council has to start looking at decisions about, well, is this something we need to do? Or do we, at that point, you start looking at cutting services and positions because there's no other way to pay for the growth that we have just in inflation alone. But this is a big deal. It was in the Idaho legislature this year. A bill was brought forward on this to try to restore that. Counties are not interested in it, which that's their business. But we met with the county recently to talk about shared programs, and this is why we have to kind of get tough with each other sometimes because we both know that it's getting tight. Budgets are getting tight, and this one is pretty key to us. So we've lost a lot of money.
Public transit, they are another fund that have been leaning in on their reserves for several years in a row, and they can continue to do so based off their reserve balance, and they could probably continue to do so for another couple of years. But eventually, those reserves will be gone. They'll need additional property taxes to continue the program. So you should be mindful of that. I would say the more immediate concerns are library and transportation. And then once we can stabilize their reserves, and we probably need to start looking at transit. But for the 26 budget year, it's built with the same property taxes as the current year.
So then with public transportation, I see tonight we have a grant to approve for new buses. So with all the grants and everything we get for the public transportation, this is above that. This is what is it, $400,000 or $500,000 of the cost
So
to the city?
public transit has, they do receive a considerable amount through grants. They have different grant programs that support different types of activities. So their operating grants, they get grant funding up to 50% of their budget. And then on the capital side, they receive grant funds at 80% from the federal government, 20% match. But the city always has to match those funds. And on the operating side is a 50% match. So, and there's a cap to how much grant funds that they can get. And I think that they've maxed that out, correct? So it's possible, I think it's more than likely, I apologize, I don't know this, that what we're putting into the program might be in excess of 50% slightly. I don't know, maybe not. So it's about 50-50.
So is our public transportation, is that about an average for cities to the cost of public transportation? Just curious.
On a friend.
Welcome, Director. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Shannon Grove, Community Development Director. Public transportation is currently under community development. So under operating for public transportation, you get an allocation because we're in an urbanized area. And so that urbanized area is split between Idaho and Washington. The allocation that public transportation receives is used for operating. Some operating can be done under 80-20, and that's why it's not a full 50-50 split on operating. We are comparable when it comes to small urban type of systems. And so we have the fixed route and the complementary paratransit. When I say complementary, I don't mean that we do it as a favor. I mean we do it as a requirement of the feds. So yes, it is comparable.
Very good, thank you.
You bet.
Okay, I'm gonna move on. So now we're to the general fund. So in the general fund, we have a mix of activities within it. Our public safety, fire and police. We have our administrative activities such as my office, finance, the legislative, the mayor, human resources, and then we have our parks and recreation department, facilities, community development. And so listed off to the left there are the revenues that we have available to us in the general fund. And we'll start with the state shared revenues. There's two different types of state shared revenues that we receive, which means the state collects those revenues and then they disperse it out to local government entities. The first one is sales tax. So right before the pandemic, the state readjusted their formulas on how they distribute the sales tax. City of Lewiston, we were in a favorable result of that calculation. We've had pretty minimal to little growth, so we were not a city that benefited off that. And then what happened is we had a couple of anomaly years, so we were expecting a drop in the revenue or very little change in that revenue, but it actually went up, which was kind of confusing to a lot of cities. And then you adjust for it, and then it dropped down. I leaned in on the AIC. They provide revenue projections for this area. I utilized those, and those were overstated. So what we've done is we've just froze the budget, and we're waiting for that revenue to catch up to it. So our current revenue budget in both the current year and what I've built into the 26 budget is a 4.2 million. We're projecting to collect just 3.9, just right under 4 million. There's some disparity there. I haven't been too concerned about it up until this current year, and we'll talk about why here in a few minutes.
The AIC is Association of Idaho Cities that provides this information for us.
And then the other side, the liquor distribution, so the taxes are collected on liquor, gets distributed back out to other areas of the state, local governments being one. 2018, they started diverting some of the money the cities were getting each year. They took 2.2% away from cities and put it into district courts, into the court system, so that within 5 years, they had now 11% of that revenue going into the courts. 2023 was the first year where that formula had been set. And again, we kind of experienced the same weird anomalies where during the pandemic, we collected way more than we could have predicted that we would have collected in liquor. And then we saw the big drop. And so kind of the same story there. It's like you can no longer rely on your trend analysis because they've just changed the formula. We've got these odd years with the pandemic, so we went to the AIC, and now we've just froze the budget, waiting for that revenue to catch up to it. On the other side of this, we have our interest income. And about that 2022, I put some investment tools in place on the city's idle funds that were in the bank accounts so that we could start leveraging those funds against the favorable market rates that were happening at the time and are continuing to happen today. And we've been ratcheting up that budget on investment income off to the right where you see the 120,000, the 400,000, the 500,000. Those are the amounts that we set for budget amounts. But then the bolder amounts there, the 670, the 867, those are the actual amounts collected. I intentionally was trying to be really conservative on what we had for budget because I'm assuming those rates will eventually come down. And I don't want to put the council in a situation where we have to quickly respond with subplanning that with property tax dollars. But you can see in 2023, 2024, when we were starting to see those disparities with the state shared revenues, we were more than fine on the investment income side to cover that difference. Now we're closing the gap there. So I think we may need to take a look at this in a year or two to see if we continue to freeze those budgets or do we start to bring them down. I do want to point out, you can see where the investment income in 2024, the actual collected for the year, that's a completed year, was $867,000. What we have projected for fiscal year 25 is a $607,000. That's partially due to interest rates have come down slightly, but if council recalls, we did have a pretty significant drop in our reserves last year, and so there's kind of a combined effect happening there. Another large revenue source we have in the general fund is our admin internal service fees. What this means is there are activities within the general fund, such as my department, the finance department, our legal office, our human resource department, the legislative body, the mayor's office, that provide services to all departments citywide, which include our enterprise funds. So to make certain that we're not putting an undue burden on our property tax payers, we do a charge back to the enterprise funds for the use of those services to make certain that user rates are also paying for those services. And this is all done through a time study. So we track our time. We try to do it annually. But at minimum every 2 years. We do a time study where anyone who works in those departments I just rattled off, we all have to track our time for a month or two to figure out where our time is being focused on. It goes into this time study that's a historical average of all that time spent, which drives this formula. And we've had a little bit of a hybrid that's dropped caused that revenue to drop, which is some of the budgets have kind of held pretty firm. There hasn't been a lot of change in those budgets. Like legals has gone down over the last few years just through staffing. And then where our time was focused also changed in the last couple of time studies. So that is all based off time studies applied towards the budgets for those departments, and it just calculates out the revenue. So that's down slightly this year.
So it says revenue, but this is actually a cost.
So revenue to the general fund is a cost to the enterprise funds. And some, like finance, we spend a lot of our time working on enterprise funds. I mean, my office probably is as much as purchasing, and that isn't as much as utility billing, right? Utility billing, close to 100% of their time is spent on enterprise funds, right? That's why they're there, is to bill out for your utilities, collect those monies. So that's kind of what makes up these totals, is you've got your utility billing, account being fully allocated out to your enterprise funds. Purchasing is heavily weighted towards enterprise funds. Finance is probably fairly heavily allocated out. Legal, they spend a lot of time on enterprise fund related ordinances and resolutions. The mayor's office, and then the legislative body is allocated at the same rate the mayor's office is. We don't make you participate in the time study, we attach you to the mayor's time.
So the administrative services for the utilities doesn't come out of the utilities buckets?
It does through the admin internal service charges. So there's a kind of an internal charge for that. It's in the general fund, it's appropriated in the general fund, and then there's this chargeback fee that occurs.
Like the water
Yeah.
fund or the sewer fund.
Right, the utility division is housed within the finance department to make certain that we're properly doing our processes and our internal controls all align with our governmental accounting procedures. It's really needs to have those accounting controls and processes in place, but they're there solely for the benefit of the utilities.
Gotcha. Okay, so they're the water fund and sewer fund and I don't know, maybe the stormwater fund.
Stormwater and
are
sanitation.
essentially hiring a portion of your department to do the collection work. Okay.
So those are, we go through what we get through the state, what we generate ourselves through investment earnings, and then our admin internal service fees. Those are our primary revenues for the general fund outside of property taxes and reserves. So we'll take a look at reserves first, save property taxes for last. So our unassigned reserves specifically, at the end of 2024, we had $10.3 million of unassigned reserves. That's an audited number, so that's a firm, known number. And that equated to 116 days cash on hand. It works out to about $89,000 a day. And in the 2025 budget, we built that utilizing 1.3 million of reserves. So with the planned usage of 15 days reserves, then I currently have in the 26 budget, which you please remember it's a preliminary budget at this point in time, the use of $967,000 of reserves. So if we were to move forward with this budget as it stands today to public hearing and it was adopted by council, we would project that we would be down to 91 days cash on hand at the end of 2026. So I want council to take a look at what that $967,000 is currently being allocated towards. And this is very consistent to some of the standard items that we've had in the prior year's budget. We've been allocating money for legal fees. Whether we use that or not is to be determined, but it's there. Should we need it, we will have, we do have something currently in litigation that has a potential for cost next year. We've been allocating $250,000 to facilities to tackle some deferred maintenance issues. They do have an annual budget, but it's very minimal. It's $130,000. We have our community service contracts with the Boys and Girls Club, Valley Vision, Civic Theater. And then last year, we had put in the budget to do some additional funding to workers' comp as well as the fleet replacement fund. This would be the second year of those funding those items. And then those would disappear out of the 27 budget. Does that add up? I had 967 and 922. Oh, I'm missing an item. It's a utility assistance program. Is it the other item? Yes.
Back on your other page, that the 10 million on 9/30/24. So that was right before we paid the $4 million?
That was after.
Right after, I mean.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that is not, so that is what you had in reserves at the beginning of the year. So let's move forward to property taxes. So the council has the ability to increase your property tax base by $724,000. You could increase it $965,000 if you wanted to dip into your foregone property tax, your foregone balance. To balance out the funds, as we just discussed, the amount that would need to go into the property tax base, in addition to the new construction and annexation dollars, is $413,000. So that is how I've balanced out the funds to today. That doesn't include anything extra, so let's move forward and we can come backwards. So what is included in the 27 or 26 budget as of today is we factored into our 26 payroll calculations, the IAF contract. So what council I believe is set to approve tonight, that would include all the things that are in that contract. We have a tentative agreement with AFSCME on their pay scale. This is just their pay scale. That includes a 1% market adjustment. That's included in the 26 budget currently. Jennifer presented to you, I think last Monday, the update in the Nez Perce County, the contract with Nez Perce County for prosecution services. That's built into the budget as it stands today. All the COLAs, the step increases for the city's pay plans that exist today are in this budget. If you recall back to the first budget work session, we kind of have an ugly number on our commercial insurance package. We don't see how we're gonna avoid that, so that's built into this budget. We're still working on that. We're gonna try to get that as low of an increase as possible, but it's built into the budget. What's currently not in the budget are the items to the right that have the big red X on them. Health insurance, the trustees just adopted a 1.5% increase in their premiums. That is only not in the budget because I haven't had time to calculate it to put it into the budget. But that will need to go into the budget because their board approved that increase and we don't have a choice there. Last Monday, Mike Isaacs came before council and presented their annual report, which included a request for support. That is not in the budget. The mayor and I will discuss that next week. The mayor and I also have not sat down and gone through department requests to figure out what requests we want to put in the proposed budget. And then lastly, there's this utility judgment of $112,000. Let's discuss that a little bit because it's unique, it's unusual. We had it last year. Last year we had a judgment that we levied for of $67,000. And what that is the state, they are the ones who assess the values of utility properties. So our residential, commercial properties, those are assessed by the county assessor. But when it comes to the value of utilities, that's assessed at the state level. And there was a challenge on those state assessment values several years ago. And they were successful, the utility companies were successful in that challenge. And so what it means is the state overvalued those properties. And because they overvalued them, all the taxing entities received more property tax dollars than we should have because of that overstated assessed value. So now those taxing entities have to pay that back. So the city didn't do anything wrong. There's no judgment against the city. It's just how it's termed in the state code. They allow you to levy for those outside your other levy rates. So it's a kind of a separate levy that you can levy for. Last year we did. We levied for the $67,000. You don't have to. You can use other revenues to supplant your what will happen is they just reduce what we collected the property tax dollars by that $112,000, but you can use another revenue to supplant it. So that's something the mayor and I will discuss on how he wants to build that in the proposed budget. But you should be aware of that. And we'll discuss it at public hearing when we get to that point in time where how we built that into the budget. So the $67,000 was related to Lumen Technologies and Avista Gas. This $112,000 is for the Avista utility.
So Director, for councilors, that's what's called a centrally assessed property because they have properties throughout the state in more than one county. And so the state does that. So railroads would be another example of a centrally assessed property. And so that's what they're doing here. The state does the assessment on those and then we have to accept those results. And when it's challenged, just like going in front of a board of equalization on something, where the counties may have to make it right, it's the same kind of process.
So let's step back to property taxes a little bit. So let's actually go back to capital fund. Earlier this year, we had the bond initiative on the ballot. And had that bond passed, the capital transportation would have been able to complete out the Main Street project with that bond. their portion of their bond payment was just slightly over $1 million, which is just slightly less than 50% of what they're utilizing in the current year budget. If the bond had passed, I think it would have given council a little more opportunity on what to do with property taxes, because you could have taken that 2.7 million and maybe diverted it to the other areas that we need to increase taxes on. But that bond did not pass. And so we have other areas of the budget that need some attention with property tax dollars. The other message that I got from that is that our citizens would rather us cash fund these capital projects rather than using debt as a tool to fund them. So in addition to looking at these other areas that we need to raise our tax budget to support those funds, council might also take into consideration, do we put more money into capital transportation? Because now we know we're potentially looking at cash funding the entirety of the Main Street project. So those are things for council to take into consideration. Likewise, had the bond passed, it would have given council some opportunity with that 2.7 that's currently allocated to capital transportation, where maybe they could have leveraged some of those dollars to support the areas of the city that need that lift in property taxes. So it's just, different things that you now have to take into consideration. Let's review what kind of happens next. So next week, the mayor and I will sit down and we'll start working on finalizing the budget for the purpose of public hearing. So one thing that's important for council to remember is you can always bring the budget down once we've put it out we publish it for public hearing. At that point, you can bring the budget down. You cannot bring it back up. So we are more apt to build a lot into the budget to give, to be able to fund some of those department requests, and then council can trim it back from there. You just can't increase it. We will be having our public hearing, that's the fourth bullet down, on August 11th. That's a Monday night. It's at a regular budget or city council meeting. So working backwards, we always publish our public hearing notice because of the legal requirements that we have to meet the Sunday before August 11th, so August 10th, and then we also publish a week prior to that date as well. So the public hearing notices will be published on August 3rd and August 11th. Those get published in the Tribune. And we will put out budget documents to come out about that same time or shortly before the public hearing notices are published. So we'll be working on getting those ready for publication at the end of July. We will have one that will be inserted into the Tribune on the same date as the first public hearing notice. That gives a kind of a narrative story behind the budget to our citizens. And then we publish out a little bit more of we publish out a more detailed one for the benefit, mainly for the benefit of council, but we also put it on the website for the citizens as well. They'll have access to it. We also bring some printed copies of that particular one to the public hearing and then the subsequent readings of the budget. So we have our first reading of the budget and related ordinances, so that will include amendments to the current year budget. It'll include the tax appropriation ordinance. We'll have the first reading on August 11th with the public hearing. We'll come back and do a second reading of the ordinance the following Monday on August 18th. And then we'll do the third reading on August 25th with adoption that date. I put a big star on that second reading of the budget because ideally, if council were wanting to amend these ordinances and make changes, we would want that to occur either during the first reading, the second reading. It gets really difficult to amend that budget on that third and final night. We did it last year. It was complicated. You guys probably remember we had to take a couple long breaks to calculate that out. There were still a couple of errors in there that we had to just adjust out through other areas of the budget because the tax and the appropriations didn't pencil out perfectly together. They were minor. We took care of it internally. But it's hard to do those on that final reading, so I'm available if you need, any help, you have any questions, anything that would help you through this process so we can do this seamlessly and however I can help, I'm here.
On the slide, the package you sent us, when you go to that unassigned reserves, we had 2 pages of the same thing,
Yeah,
so we didn't get the breakdown.
I had an error, but this one's correct and I can send you the corrected one. I'll actually send it to Tanya so she can publish it to the city's website into the agenda. Yeah, I caught that error today. I also did not have this current slide in your packet. So, couple of last minute modifications. I also do want to briefly touch on what we didn't discuss today is the building reserve. So we had, I don't recall, I think we had, I can always email that information out to council, but what I did is I projected out what we expect to have left in that fund at the end of this year based off the projects council approved earlier this year and what will actually get completed out of those approved projects. And then we just rolled the remaining balance of that fund into next year and fully appropriated it out. So I apologize because I cannot remember if that was 4.8 or 5.3 million. So I will get that information to council, but you'll definitely have it when we do the budget guides and it will definitely be part of the public hearing. We just didn't discuss it today. Yes.
We had the requests from all the departments, I believe. If we had ones in here that we really wanted to possibly see in the budget, when would you prefer to have that information by?
As soon as possible. Because as I mentioned, when the mayor and I sit down next week, we'll start going through those. I would recommend that you reach out to the mayor on those. You can include me on that, but reach out to the mayor, if you would, please.
Thank you.
Yes.
I would assume that also means ones that we don't want to see.
Correct. Yeah, any thoughts you have on those budget requests, please provide that feedback to the mayor, who will share that information with me, and we'll work through those together. We just really haven't had the time, and so next week we're gonna sit down for a couple different topics, and that will be one of them. We'll just go through those and start looking at what we want the proposed budget to look like and what we can factor in of those requests. So I'm sure he would appreciate any input you had.
And I'm gonna share just as much information as I can with everyone without violating an open meeting law, so that we can just be as informed as we can when we go to make those decisions. So, but to be sure, you can always call me. I have no secrets on the budget. If you said something to Tanya, that's probably the best way to do that, to have one point of contact, and then Tanya will help us get it distributed. But we can go back out through a blind copy, without getting into a serial conversation, just as an FYI, like I do sometimes. I'll send you some things. You'll see me send it to Tanya first, and you'll get a copy of it also, so.
We really have to have the budget pretty much locked down by like July 10th, July 15th at the latest. Like we can maybe make a couple little tweaks to it because we'll start working on the budget documents about that time. And we start first with a public hearing notice, and then we make certain everything reconciles back to that public hearing notice because we don't want to risk an error there. So we are building those documents, but then constantly reconciling them back to the public hearing notice to make certain that we've got that notice correct.
And then, as we go down the road, so if the mayor sets a budget here, and then the council says, well, okay, that's fine, I don't like these 2 things in here, there were 2 things in the list that you didn't include, you have every right to make that amendment when we go through the hearing process. Say, strike a line through those 2 things and add these 2 things to keep the budget at the same level, or you can say, well, cut the budget down. Take these things 2 out and leave the budget at that. you can make that motion. If it gets supported, then that's where we are after that night, you know, but it can't go back up. That's what Director Gordon is saying. So it really becomes your budget after the director and I present it to you for the first reading.
On the transfer station, I forgot what the commissioner had said when he would get an update to us. Is that this week or next couple weeks?
So I don't have the latest from the county on that. The last that I heard, Commissioner Gish was going to be visiting with Assault County some more to talk about a direct haul. I've not heard back from him on, and other questions about operations, but the county can pretty much cut and run anytime they want to, you know, because it really, our percentage volume goes down. So if we bring in 10 tons that day and the county backs out and we only have 8 tons that day, we only ship 8. So we do have some reductions that'll come right away. Over the long term, it's less wear and tear on equipment in the transfer station, so we gain back that away. But, you know, we'll feel the reduction in revenue if they choose to do that. But we'll probably make some other operational changes, I'm guessing, to either offset some of that revenue loss or, you know, to potentially even cut some of the services that we provide. We deliver a lot of good services out there, so we won't know until it happens.
Okay.
That reminded me of something I left out of my presentation on the enterprise funds. We didn't talk about them today, but when Dustin made his presentation at the last work session, he talked about the projects that they have planned in those various funds, and then he also had a discussion with council about rates, what you guys are comfortable with on the public hearing. So we built these budgets off that conversation, so those rates that he's going into public hearing are what's factored into the budget. If, for whatever reason, council approves something less than that, the budgets remain as is. It's just the departments will have that much less to work with for capital projects. So we just adjust it out with capital projects. But I do want council to be aware that that is factored into the enterprise funds budgets.
You know, if councilors, if you would like to meet one-on-one with myself or Director Gordon or any of the directors, you know, I would certainly reach out to them. It's going to go quick. The next month's going to go quick. And then we're going to be at the third reading, and then the pressure's going to mount, but
Well, that's all I have for you this afternoon, so unless you have any more questions for me, I'm gonna step back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so, okay, if that's it, Counselor, we'll move to Roman number 5, budget discussion. This is an opportunity for councilors to ask questions, have discussions, and provide direction to staff related to the fiscal year 2026 budget. It's an action item, so I would just open it up to all the councilors if you have any remaining questions or directions that you'd like to provide. Director Gordon especially, but you can also share them with me. Director Gordon and I will be meeting next week to, you know, put a little bit more flesh on the bones and come up with the initial budget. So you could share those tonight or send them to me. And Councilor Speckelmeyer.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess for me, the biggest thing to stand out for me is the $500,000 set aside for the Warner Thane Prescott design. I don't feel as a council, like I said last meeting, that we've decided on anything. If that stays in, I would rather see it put into a fund that when we did decide what projects we wanted to do, we had it available for the design. But like any other time these things come around, when this comes around for vote again in the fall, it'll say, well, we already approved it. Well, in fact, you know, I don't think we did, and I think this main one, that Warner Thane one, was the biggest one that we voted against, that we had to come back and re-vote on it. So I don't think there was many counselors that liked that project to begin with.
Councilors, do you remember that study that was done? Counselor?
I see what Counselor Spickelmeyer is saying. It might be confusing to the public if, when we come do the bond again and see what that looks like, that might be misunderstood. We've had that with this project and trying to get this bond on other misunderstandings as far as thinking that we were approving roundabouts and everything. And so trying to be as clear as possible with what's on hand and what we didn't and didn't do is gonna be, I think, paramount.
Counselor Klein?
So on that topic, would there be a way, maybe Director Johnson? Can I ask you a question?
It wouldn't be a meeting without hearing from Director.
I was getting sore sitting over there. Glad you called me up.
So I was wondering, would there be any way that you could do some sort of like preliminary design with that to bring different ideas to see what would work before actually making a design?
Yeah, Dustin Johnson, Public Works Director. I think I need to go back and talk with Amy on this because looking at her presentation here, my numbers didn't match her numbers. And so if you remember, my first presentation, what was in the packet included Thane and Preston and 10th in the design component and had a dollar figure. And then when I presented that, we bumped that with Main Street. And so I think in the evolution of trying to figure out which projects to fund and which projects not to fund, there may have been a short circuit in the communication. So I need to get with Amy, and as the mayor and Amy and you guys meet, we can probably refine this and get a little bit more solid on those numbers. Because Main Street, that's the full design, and I don't think we want to do a full design without actually having funding on that project either. So there's a few things I need to get clarified with Amy and the mayor and you on those projects. To go back, and when I got, last time I was up here, whatever it was, 2 weeks ago, the impression I took from this group was to not put any money into construction or design until we've hashed out the details, and that would be my, what we have right now was vetted through the MPO, and the MPO is a planning organization, not a designing organization. So I want to take those concepts, whatever was, maybe none of those concepts are approved through this body, and we will start over and look at it. But I want to get something finite because I guess this group didn't necessarily overwhelmingly approve that Thane corridor study. But I think this group recognizes that's a corridor that needs to be addressed. So how do we get from what we've done already to something concrete into the budget is where I need to get to. And I don't think we're not there yet for the budget. So yes, my intent is to come back once we're done with budget and have this conversation with you probably at a work session and kind of figure out what your general consensus is for a path forward for not just that 10th and Thane section, but that corridor, because it is a networks issue up there. Does that answer your question? That was kind of long, but
I think so. I just want to clarify that we'll still have different options.
Yeah.
To look at before.
Yeah, and I don't think anything that was in that study, again, to give this council reassurance and the public reassurance that we did not intend to take that, especially after the feedback we got, to take that and roll that right forward and say, this is what we're gonna do and like it or not, so no.
Councilor Spickelmeyer?
So I have a quick question, since you're up there. Thanks, Director. On the Main Street design, the phase one, so if the city, since the bond didn't pass, and we're going to do the project, should the city plan on about that number every year until we get it completed? Is this something that's pretty darn close? Every year it's gonna be 2.5 million?
So that number, 2.5 million was for design. So if that concept had passed, or if the bond had passed, we would be programming that $2.5 million in for design. So that's where I was putting this budget together before the bond passed. So I programmed that in as a placeholder. Well, obviously it didn't pass, and so that got moved out. But it was close, and I've been having some conversations with other entities that could financially contribute to this. And so now I need a number, because I think there'll be some conversations and some design work over the next fiscal year. It's not gonna be $2.5 million though. We still have that arterial reconstruction fund that that's what I call it. It's transportation capital, to build that reserve. So at some point, that reserve will be big enough that we can start doing these projects without the need of a bond, but to invest in that or in that arterial.
I guess that's where I was going, is at what time or what dollar amount is our go time we could actually start?
Yeah, that, I don't know that. That's where I'm trying to work with some other agencies and get some assurances on that. And maybe it's a smaller bond, maybe it's a revenue bond, maybe it's no bond, maybe it's a grant. There's a lot of opportunity. Well, I should say there's a lot of opportunity. If it was easy, we would have done it by now. But there's a lot of different paths to feel out as we move forward.
So the director and I and others have been working on trying to put together Plan B for November coming up. You know, should we run another bond? Should we redo some things? And so we've got some good information and we're just working as fast as we can to put it together, so.
So carry on with that then. So if this $2.5 million doesn't actually go to design, it will be put into the arterial fund?
Yep.
Mayor, you were talking about legislative, thank you, Dustin. Kind of looking at our budgets and kind of straining us a little bit. Have you heard anything about the foregone taxes and them talking about trying to get rid of that or move that? Or is that just?
Well, I don't have an update on that, but that's always a discussion in Boise, you know, trying to take, the state gives and the state takes. And the legislative body has all kinds of ideas about how to rework our tax legislation. You know, one of the items that is looked at is local option taxing. I'll never hold my breath on that one, but you know, that would be another option to try to fund some of these services that the city provides. So we already have local option taxing. It's called a franchise fee. And we had 2 years ago a vote on that to increase that from 1% to 3%, and voters said no, but those monies would have been used 100% for street preservation. And the nice thing about that is you have entities like Lewis Clark State College that don't pay property taxes, and they have a big chunk of our real estate downtown Lewiston. And so let's say instead of giving the city $100 a year, they would give the city $300 a year through their taxes because they're using it, not the rest of the people. And so it's a consumption tax like all local option taxes. And so tend to be. So I still believe that's a good avenue to pursue because it provides a revenue stream for the city. You know, another example would be, I need to check this, it's coming in from our attorney, make sure I'm not getting in trouble. And
Stop talking.
I'll answer that in a second. So, yeah, you don't know if she's listening.
Stay on the ticket.
So for example, I hope you saw in the newspaper the announcement about Pivot Tech coming to town and working with the Port of Lewiston to build a fiber infrastructure, and it'll be owned by the community. And the network today, the Port of Lewiston, pays a 5% franchise fee, and that goes to the city along with all the other franchise fees. So different services have different rates on them. And there's a possibility that they're gonna come to the city and say, hey, once we start building this out, would you guys consider lowering your franchise fee from 5% to 1% so we can be like everybody else? And I'll tell you what my vote is. If I have to vote, the answer is no, because it's an important source of revenue for us. They impact the streets, they impact the right-of-way. This helps to pay for it. Those that are using it pay for it. So again, whether it's a franchise fee on Vista, electricity and gas, these fiber companies and things like that, these all help pay for services in the city. And so the more that we can take off of the property tax base and put onto these other funding sources, I think is a good thing. And so would the legislature come and look at trying to adjust those? Yes, they do every session that they go in there, but I'm not aware of any draft piece of legislation right now that is going to change that. We talk about revenues to the city. The legislature, one of the first things they have to do every year is they have to set a revenue target. And once they set that revenue target, they can't budget above that. So if they're saying we're gonna collect $10 million this year, they can't set budgets over 10 million. That's how they balance the budget at the state level in Idaho, okay? They didn't adopt a revenue target, and they started passing bills like cutting taxes, right? They had that big tax bill, and then all of a sudden the revenues don't come in, or they're not where they thought. So they went and spent some of that money even before we knew what that level was gonna be. And so to offset that, my understanding, I don't think it's changed, is they were going to go, we have a surplus limit in the state of Idaho, so when sales tax revenues exceed what we need for the budget, then half of that goes into, I can't remember where that half goes, the other half goes into strategic initiatives for the state of Idaho. And so the strategic initiatives then would distribute money to the local highway districts, the cities and counties for roads and bridges, things like that. Well, they're going to take some of that money. They have taken some of that money this year to pay for that tax cut. That's money that we would have had this year. So when we set our budget and we're down $500,000, Director Gordon, there's nothing she can do about it. Except, again, as a council, you can cut things from the budget, you can cut positions, you can do all kinds of things. But when we have everything else to look at, we're losing these shared revenues. It puts a lot of pressure on the local municipalities. And that's what we're facing, especially this year. It seems to be getting worse every year. So this is where you see the counties and the cities sometimes rub up against the state. So if they come home and they tell me, we cut your taxes, I'm gonna say, well, how did you pay for that? Because some of that is taken out of the county and the city coffers. So it really puts a lot of weight on the council members to try to figure this out. I mean, that's really what it amounts to. So, but I have not heard anything yet.
Really kind of seems like it was a rob Peter to pay Paul type situation. It's kind of unfortunate.
That's the best kind of tax. Have somebody else pay it.
Yeah. Except the taxpayers, they don't want that. Yeah, something to think about going into this session, is everything the mayor just highlighted, because it's adding more constraints than we already had.
Councilor Klein?
You were speaking about consumption taxes, and I was wondering if, could we use like a percentage of sales, like raise sales tax in the town to put towards our roads? Or the
Well,
Main Street
we get
project?
sales tax revenues, and so we decide how to spend those general funds, so we kind of already do that. In terms of a dedicated source, council could have a policy decision to say that, just like today, if we have about 2.7 million in that fund for transportation, you can vote to increase that or decrease that. We do that with our other funds, like our signed building funds or other places where we try to keep certain reserves in place, so we're kind of already doing that. And I would support putting more into that. I think we need more monies in our capital funds.
But as far as like being able to raise actual sales tax, do we have that ability?
We do not have that ability today. The only local option taxing authority we have today is franchise. So Vista could agree to raise it from 1% to 3% on its own, which they won't do. Or we could get the citizens to pass it and say, yes, increase our franchise fees. And it would take pressure off of our property taxes, so. But that has to be passed. They have to be willing to do that, so.
Yeah. And the only other local option tax we don't have, but could be an option if the legislative would allow it, is a hospitality tax. So they charge towards hotel stays and leisure activity type stuff. But at a current time, I think you have to be a certain population to be able to be eligible for that, or what do they call that? Another criteria that I can't think of. But there's 2 criteria you have to follow in order to be eligible for that, and we're currently not within those, so we're not able to utilize that. Do we know what's in our foregone tax amount? How much we've saved so far?
I think we're just over 2 million
Okay.
in our foregone balance. Director
You're just
Board.
shy of 3. I apologize, I don't know. I'll send the information.
Thank you.
Let's just say 2 million. I don't think it's any more than that, but
That's something to think about. If the at the current time, as the mayor says, the legislators are not, but it is sounds like a constant topic for discussion, is whether they would utilize that money, those foregone taxes, or, I don't know, dissolve them maybe. And then once that happens and we don't have them anymore, I know prior councils have saved quite a bit of money out of those foregone taxes for possible projects, infrastructure updates, things like that.
and that's a good comment, Counselor, because the legislature is always putting more constraints on local government, because you think about annexation or new construction coming into the base, right? And the state has said, well, you can only have a certain percentage of that, so we don't even capture the full value of that, and then they go after the urban renewal districts and so forth. And so it continues to put pressure on us. If you look at the Treasure Valley, Boise, Star Meridian, those areas where they are growing so fast, they cannot capture that new growth, all of the new growth that they have, or annexation, but yet the services are being demanded. And so they have been very creative with some of these fees that they've created. They haven't been challenged yet, but they have no other way to pay for that except to add new fees to it. We haven't had to do that yet up here. But it's all very complicated.
I know when I was down in Boise at the ASC leadership trainings, there was a lot of cities that face an influx of population, like McCall and places like that have a seasonal influx of population, and then when they leave, then it drops down to their normal. But obviously they have all of the people using more water and their roads and services, and so that's why they have that option tax, that hospitality tax, to offset that. It's really their main big source of survival, with not having that consistent population in the city at all times. So the influx of it.
Okay, well, if there's no further comments, we'll move on to unfinished and new business. Roman numeral 6A, City Councilor comments. Comments shall not be related to an item currently before the City Council, or an item that may come before the City Council in the foreseeable future, and shall be limited to comments, not discussion. Councilors, any comments?
Mayor.
Councilors,
I just want to say to the rest of the council, I met with the mayor last budget session, and we kind of broke down what the idea of the budget was going to look like, things that I wanted to see in other councilors, and for me it was really helpful because I was able to kind of really dive in and didn't feel like it was as much noise going on during that. So I'd highly suggest to sit down with them if you have anything. So we're all on the same page when we come down to voting. I felt it was real helpful. I guess it depends on the person, but just something to think about.
thank you, Councilor. Other comments? Okay, mayor comments. I have one. I should have wrote it down. Well, I can't remember what it is, so we'll move to Roman numeral 7. I can bring it up tonight when we get there. So with that, I would entertain, I was gonna say, before we get there, mayor comments, I remembered what it is. Justin, have you had a chance to meet the city councilors yet?
Not officially, no, sir.
So councilors, if you would mind, just introduce yourself briefly to Justin. We'll see him again tonight. Our council president is not here today, but we're expecting him tonight. So Councilor Klein, would you please?
Just my name?
Yeah, you can say hello or welcome or whatever you'd
Jessica
like.
Klein, I met you in the interviews.
Yeah, I remember your face. Good to see you again.
Counselor Forsman, glad you're on the team. We're excited to have some new ideas and fresh perspective come to Lewiston and into our Parks and Rec. So, and I have 2 kids that obviously love activities and sports in the parks. And so I'm excited for families to be able to have someone that's really looking out for them on that.
John Spickelmeyer, I'm the Parks and Rec liaison.
See my face?
Counselor Wright, Matt Wright, welcome. Happy to get to know you.
Kathy Schroeder, and welcome to our valley and to our Parks and Rec.
Okay, council, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Been moved by Councilor Forsman, second by Councilor Schroeder to adjourn. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We are adjourned. Thank you, council.